After Donald Trump struck Iran, oil prices are now going up. And today,
one number that crystallizes everything that Jennifer Griffin and Trey Yingst and Jillian were just saying, it's the oil price right now. We are in the 60s.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Israel and Iran have agreed to a complete and total ceasefire.
Et donc il faut le dire tel que c'est, il n'y a pas de légalité à ces frappes.
Iran launched 14 ballistic missiles at Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. There were no casualties, no bloodshed, but something fundamental shifted. This wasn't just a counterstrike. It was a calculated message aimed at Washington, at NATO, and at a watching world. A demonstration that retaliation no longer needs to come with body bags to reshape geopolitics. It only needs to be deliberate, public, and unmistakable. For 94 tense minutes, air traffic was suspended over Qatar. Command centers were moved into lockdown. U.S. and allied forces braced for escalation that didn't arrive not in physical terms, but in strategic terms. Because what Iran did wasn't about military gain, it was about narrative dominance. And it worked. Across foreign ministries in Europe, Asia and the Gulf, one question now echoes louder than any missile warning. Has the post-9/11 military balance in the Middle East finally collapsed? The strike didn't start a war, but it exposed that the old order may already be over. What happened at Al Udeid wasn't a declaration of war. It was a message calculated, controlled, and unmistakably strategic. Hours before the missiles were launched, Iran quietly tipped off regional officials, a move eerily reminiscent of the post-Soleimani retaliation in 2020. There was no attempt to maximize casualties or cripple infrastructure. Instead, the strikes were choreographed to fall just short of full escalation, delivering impact without provocation. The targets were symbolic, not tactical. Civilian areas were spared. U.S. troops were not harmed. For Iran, this wasn't about revenge. It was about signaling strength with precision. And in doing so, Tehran delivered a rare kind of strike, one that speaks louder in restraint than in damage. The message was layered. On one hand, it was a clear demonstration of capability. Iran can hit America's most secure regional base at will. On the other, it was a diplomatic wink. We fired because we had to, but we didn't fire to kill. We're still willing to talk if Washington is too. In a region where retaliation often spirals into decades of conflict, this was a striking deviation. Iran didn't seek war, it staged a performance of deterrence. But the true test isn't in Tehran's intention. It's in Washington's response. With Donald Trump doubling down on campaign rhetoric and projecting strength at all costs, the window for measured diplomacy is shrinking. The risk isn't just missing the signal, it's misreading it entirely. Because if this was Iran's version of an off-ramp, and the U.S. treats it as provocation, the next exchange might not come with warnings. It may come with consequences no one can control. Just days before world leaders were set to gather for the NATO Summer Summit, the United States unleashed Midnight Hammer, a sudden, high-precision strike that hit 3 of Iran's most fortified underground nuclear sites. The operation was swift, tactical, and undeniably effective in military terms. But its timing raised eyebrows. Not just in Tehran, but in Berlin, Brussels, and even among American governors. The question quickly shifted from what was hit to why. Truly a preemptive strike to deter Iran's nuclear ambitions? Or was it a calculated detonation of a different kind, one meant to reboot a domestic political narrative that was quickly spiraling out of control? For President Trump, the context at home is turbulent. Multiple court cases are circling. Inflation is biting harder than expected. Key Midwestern states are showing polling fatigue, and deep within his own party, murmurs are growing about whether he still commands the mandate he claims. Against that backdrop, Midnight Hammer doesn't just look like a strike on Iran, it looks like a strike on reality. A sharp pivot from courtrooms to command rooms, from economic stagnation to international brinkmanship, and from vulnerability to valor, at least on television. It's a familiar tactic, but with a distinctly Trumpian twist. Past presidents have used foreign engagements to rally domestic unity. But Trump doesn't just want unity, he wants a spectacle. This is politics performed at 30,000 feet with military payloads doubling as campaign signals. His goal isn't only to contain Iran, it's to reframe himself as the strongman-in-chief, indispensable, unchallenged, and unshakable. And in doing so, he forces political opponents into a trap, critique the strike, and risk looking soft on national security. support it, and legitimize the strategy even if the motives remain suspect. But this time the stage isn't just domestic, it's global, and not everyone is buying the script. NATO allies still reeling from fractured diplomacy during Trump's first term are approaching the summit with visible hesitation.
Si on peut considérer qu'il y a une légitimité à neutraliser des structures nucléaires en Iran compte tenu des objectifs qui sont les nôtres, il n'y a pas de cadre de légalité, non. Et donc il faut le dire tel que c'est, il n'y a pas de légalité à ces frappes.
France's Emmanuel Macron has refrained from endorsing the strike. Germany is questioning its legality. Even the UK, usually aligned with US hard power moves, is calling for caution. Meanwhile, Turkey and Hungary are openly warning against being dragged into another US-led confrontation in the Middle East. In other words, unity, the cornerstone of NATO, is already cracking before the summit even begins. China and Russia are also paying close attention, but not with concern. With each strike and each policy whiplash, Washington becomes more isolated diplomatically. And in that vacuum, Beijing and Moscow see opportunity. Beijing has already deepened back-channel negotiations with Tehran, quietly offering economic and strategic lifelines in exchange for oil and influence. Moscow, tied down in Ukraine but never out of the propaganda game, is using the strike to paint America as a reckless empire teetering on decline. So what started as a surgical military action may well mutate into a global political crisis. Because if Midnight Hammer was launched not to neutralize a threat, but to stabilize a presidency, then the damage won't be limited to bunkers in Iran. It could fracture alliances, embolden adversaries, and unravel years of strategic balance across the region. And the most dangerous part, if this is indeed a controlled crisis designed for headlines rather than resolution, then what happens when Trump needs another moment like this? What happens when the political pressure rises again? In the Middle East, escalation is easy. De-escalation takes trust. And right now, Washington is running out of it. As the dust settled over Iran's underground nuclear sites, the global response didn't come in the form of outrage. It came as hesitation, calculation, and diplomatic fragmentation. French President Emmanuel Macron refused to outright condemn Washington's actions, but also stopped short of offering support. His silence spoke volumes, a deliberate middle ground meant to preserve leverage without inflaming tension. Within NATO, the division was sharper. Germany, Turkey, and Hungary urged restraint, signaling they had no interest in being dragged into another Middle Eastern entanglement. Meanwhile, Poland and the United Kingdom pushed for a firmer stance, calling for alliance unity against what they framed as Iranian aggression. The result, a fractured bloc trying to hold its shape while its members pull in opposite directions. But the most telling silence came from the East. Beijing offered no formal statement, no criticism, no endorsement, just silence and strategy. Behind closed doors, Chinese officials quietly accelerated energy and defense talks with Tehran, seeing an opportunity where others saw instability. Oil weapons infrastructure. China isn't intervening militarily, but it is building leverage in the shadows using U.S. unpredictability to strengthen its own hand in the Gulf. What began as a limited strike by the United States is now morphing into something far more dangerous, a regional conflict slowly absorbing global actors. Each power has its own agenda, its own pressure points, and its own timeline, but none of them are walking away. The battlefield may be in the Middle East, but the game is being played on a global board. And as international actors quietly realign, one question lingers: is the U.S. shaping the conflict or just triggering a geopolitical free-for-all it can no longer control? Once upon a time, Washington didn't just operate in the Middle East, it designed the rules, enforced the alliances, and decided who got to play. From Baghdad to Riyadh, from Tel Aviv to Kabul. U.S. presence meant predictability. American carriers patrolled the seas, drones patrolled the skies, and the Pentagon's strategy papers shaped the entire region's future. But after the latest chain of events, from Iran's missile strike on Udeid to Trump's swift air campaign, something feels different. The world isn't reacting to American strength. It's watching American reaction. Iran didn't just fire missiles, it set the pace. It selected the target, delivered advance notice, and calibrated the scale of damage to make a statement without triggering an all-out war. That's not just military restraint. That's control of the escalation ladder. And for the first time in decades, the US wasn't the one holding that ladder. This reversal of roles has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. European allies now question whether Washington still has a long-term vision or is simply maneuvering for short-term political optics. In Gulf capitals, traditional partners are hedging bets hosting U.S. jets while quietly opening back channels with Tehran. Even Israel, one of America's closest allies, has begun conducting its own operations with limited consultation. The Pentagon insists that deterrence is intact. But the reality is harder to spin when the adversary is choosing when and how to escalate. And you're stuck reacting. You're not leading the game. You're playing defense. Trump's team insists the strikes are a show of strength. But analysts across NATO, the UN and beyond, see a different picture. A global power struggling to dictate outcomes in a region it once controlled with ease. The fundamental question is no longer what will the US do next, but rather can the US still shape the outcome at all? In a moment that demands clarity, Washington is offering improvisation. And while that might work for headlines, it's a dangerous gamble in a region built on careful signaling and strategic ambiguity. So, as Iran maneuvers with precision and global actors recalibrate behind the scenes, one question echoes from foreign ministries to frontline bases: if Tehran is setting the tempo. What exactly is Washington controlling? Now, the fear is not that America has lost its power. The fear is that it doesn't realize how much of it has already slipped away. The missile strike on Udeid wasn't designed to kill. It wasn't aimed to destroy assets or provoke a full-scale retaliation. It was something far more dangerous, a calculated message delivered at ballistic speed. Iran didn't strike to end a war. It struck to start a conversation, a hard one, placed squarely on Washington's doorstep. The question isn't just military, it's existential. Will this region descend into chaos, or is there still room for diplomacy? Because Tehran's signal was clear, the next move is yours. The airbase remained standing. Lives were spared, but the message wasn't. It cut through every briefing room in the Pentagon, across NATO command centers, and deep into the halls of the United Nations. And yet, diplomacy now stands on a razor's edge. With Trump in Washington, Netanyahu in Jerusalem, and Khamenei in Tehran, three leaders who have all been called, at different points, madmen with missiles. The question becomes not what will happen, but who will blink first. Each of them views backing down as weakness. Each believes history will reward boldness. But history also punishes miscalculation. And in this new Middle East where every missile carries a message, and every silence could be misread as consent. One spark is all it takes to light a fire none of them can control. So we're left with a final question, the one no leader seems willing to answer. If no one is ready to compromise, who will take responsibility for diffusing the fuse? Because this time the world isn't just watching, it's waiting. Will peace be chosen or provoked? Let us know in the comments. Do you believe this is the start of a broader war, or just another dangerous game? And if you want deeper analysis on the next moves from Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this is far from over.